Welcome everybody coming in. We're just getting ready to go here with Tree Planting and Care 101. Hopefully that's what you tuned in for, the monthly webinar from the Nebraska Forest Service, second Friday of the month. We sure appreciate you being here. I'm Justin Evertson with the Nebraska Forest Service, and my cohort in crime here is Graham Herbst. You're on the line, right, Graham? So
Yeah, hey everybody. Happy Friday.
right on. Happy Friday. Do a rain dance, everybody. We're tired of the drought, so
Yeah, we still need some more April and May showers now, I guess. Um, for those of you that are certified arborists, we will have CEUs available for you. What I'll be doing is putting a link for that in the chat towards the end of the talk, as we usually do. So I don't need your CEU, your certification number in the chat. You'll just click on that link once I put it in and fill out a quick form. One other thing on that real quick before we get started, it's also a way to give us feedback. So
yeah.
even if you don't need CEUs, you can still click on that link and tell us a little bit about what you thought about the webinar today. Maybe you have a topic that you'd like us to cover in the
Yeah,
future. So the
right.
link is not only for certified arborists, but it is how you get your credits.
Yeah, we'd really appreciate topic ideas. We'll try to keep these going, not just this year, but next. And we have room this year to add topics coming up. So I'll let you know we are not going to meet next month, June. We all need a break, right? As summer
Yes.
starts, but we'll be back up July. Let me look here, July 11th, summer tree care with Q&A from probably people on the call today. So come back.
Justin, this might be our first international webinar. We have a guest from Uppsala, Sweden, joining
What?
us on the webinar today.
All right. That's
That's
cool.
fantastic.
I don't know how to say welcome in Swedish, but welcome everybody. Yeah, it's good to have
You
you here.
bet.
And we're lucky today. Uh, we've got three professionals from the Nebraska Forest Service Forest Health Team. These three gals are good. They know their stuff. We go to them all the time to learn about what's bothering our trees, and they got a long list of things bothering our trees. And they're going to tag team today to help present some of the things we mostly need to be aware of. And we do hope that we'll get to the end here and have time for question and answer. You can go ahead and ask a question in the chat, and we'll try to answer these as we go along, but we will have time at the end for CEUs and follow-up questions. So have your questions ready. I think these three people like to be challenged. Am I right, everybody? Try to stump them, stump the expert, right,
I,
Lori?
I
No.
like I like easy questions.
Easy. Okay. All right, and I'm happy to kick this off with Lori Stepanek. She'll be followed by Jennifer Morris, or maybe it's Lauren Keefe. I'm not sure who's second. All right, Lauren might be second, and then Jennifer. But we'll let them figure that out as we go along. Take it away, Lori, and thank you for doing this.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Justin. Yeah, hi, I'm Lori Stepanek, Nebraska Forest Service Forest Health Specialist. I'm based in Lincoln, Nebraska. And so we are going to just really lightly touch on a few major problems that we see in our trees. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. We had a little bit of technical difficulties earlier.
All those trees that they took out.
Okay, you guys let me know. Are you seeing my screen?
Looks good, Lori.
PowerPoint. Great. That is great. So yeah, we are going to be covering some different topics here in terms of things that affect our trees, pests, problems. I'm going to cover some of the weather issues and things that we as humans do to our trees that are not good for the trees, although we often don't realize it. And in fact, these are actually more of the problems that when trees are having problems, it's usually not an insect pest problem. It's usually not a pathogenic disease problem. It's usually some type of an environmental problem, such as a weather issue or a human-induced problem. But this will be a real quick overview of just a few of the problems that we have on our trees. Let me see if I can get my next slide to work, or do I need to, what do I need to do here to do this? Page down? Nope. Okay, let's see. Let me see if I can figure this out. See if that'll work. There we
There you
go.
go. Yeah, there you go. I was gonna say the arrow.
Let's start with drought, because that is currently what we are dealing with right now in Nebraska. The entire state really is under some form of drought currently, pretty severe in some areas. And it doesn't look to be improving very much this spring. In fact, it's getting worse in some areas. And this really, you know, in the prairie state, this is something very important for our trees, because trees, you know, we're a prairie state, grass grows well here, trees not so much. So they are affected quite a bit by drought conditions. And what we see when we have drought problems with trees, we might see some immediate effects, such as leaf scorch, where the edges of the leaves turn brown. You might get some early defoliation on drought-stressed trees. Sometimes in severe drought, tree mortality will occur in some cases. But I think people kind of forget that drought has long-term effects as well in our trees, especially, for example, slow growth, limited growth in drought-stressed trees. So here we have a twig that the first year there on the left had maybe about 3 or 4 inches of growth, but as the drought continued, growth slowed down. And so you see about 2 inches then, and then the last 2 years, just 1 inch each year. Very slow, stunted growth in this drought-stressed tree. Another long-term effect of drought would be increased susceptibility to pests. So, for example, canker diseases are a type of disease that is especially a problem when trees are under drought stress. So Jennifer will talk a little bit more about cankers. And then on the insect side of things, bark beetles and borers tend to be pests that really like to attack and do well in drought-stressed trees. So those are some long-term effects of drought. And then on the other side of the coin, we have too much water, which we do occasionally have problems with. For example, just flooding issues. Back in 2012, we had the major Missouri River flooding for several weeks, even months. Roots need oxygen. So if they're underwater for too long, they're going to die back and the trees are going to decline and die. But we see overwatering in the landscape as well. And often it's in landscapes where you have automatic sprinklers that are set on a timer and they just run. They might be running daily, every other day. And while that might keep your grass alive, it's not a good way for trees to be watered. So here's an example of a tree that began to decline over the years after the underground sprinklers were installed, and they ran 3 times a week, irregardless of the rainfall that occurred. So we had just an overwatered landscape and a tree declining over the years as a result. So managing soil moisture, you know, check to see how much moisture is in that soil. You can do the screwdriver test, where you take a screwdriver and try to push it into the soil. And if it's difficult to push that screwdriver into the soil, that means you've got a dry soil. It's more resistant. So we like to, you know, do some watering of dry soils. We suggest about 1 inch a week or maybe 2 inches a week in sandy soils, and apply that water just very slowly over time so that the water can soak into the soil profile and then give it time to drain away and let that oxygen get back into the soil. And apply wood chip to conserve moisture. And you have to be careful with that wood chip mulch, not to apply it, you know, piled up against the trunk in what we call mulch volcanoes, because that trunk tissue, that bark tissue, is not meant to be under soil or under mulch. It needs to be out in the air. So just be careful as you're applying your wood chip mulches on your trees. Other tree issues, trees are sometimes planted too deeply in the soil. So again, the roots are too deep in the soil. They're not getting the oxygen they need. Trees that are too deep in the soil are not very stable in the soil. And again, you can kind of see there on the right, the bark of the tree is just kind of rotting off because it's been under soil. And how do you know if a tree is too deep? Take a look at the base of the trunk. If you've got a root flare there where the trunk is flaring out into the roots, you've got a tree at the proper depth. But if it looks like the tree is going straight into the ground like a telephone pole, then that's an indication that that tree may be too deep in the soil. And here's another example that might tell you the tree is too deep. If you can see the roots coming see the branches coming right out of the soil, originating from below the soil line. This tree was planted too deep, and it may grow, but it's always going to struggle because it's just too deep in the soil. Another example, soil fill. The landscape has been changed a little bit. They've added some soil over the root system. Here they tried to protect the tree, but the vast majority of this root system of this tree is just buried too deeply under this soil fill. Other issues. How about girdling issues? Girdling roots. These are very common in our landscape trees. Sometimes they aren't manifested until many years later, after that trunk has grown to a large diameter and it starts to butt up against that circling root. These girdling roots are cutting off the ability of the tree to move materials up and down that trunk. So girdling roots are a major issue in our landscape trees. And they usually result because circling roots formed when the tree was growing in a nursery pot too long. And so that's what sometimes gets planted into the landscape. And then years later, those circling roots are now becoming girdling roots. Another girdling issue, mower blight. We call it mower blight, where your mowers and your string trimmers just hit up against that tissue around the base of the trunk and damage it. We see this a lot in where the grass is growing right up against that tree trunk and there's no mulch ring there. Another advantage to using a wood chip mulch around the trees is to keep the string trimmers and mowers away from the trunk. Other girdling issues, staking materials, strings, whatever's being left on the trunks too long. The weed barrier fabric, sometimes that's being put into landscapes to control weeds, and it just doesn't break down very quickly. And so again, that trunk starts to grow and butts up against that weed barrier and it starts to girdle the trunk. So a lot of girdling issues in our landscapes. And finally, I want to touch on herbicide damage in our trees, because this is a major problem that we're seeing in our landscape trees. A lot of the herbicides cause a lot of distortion of tree foliage, cupping, curling, strapping, discoloration. This is a redbud tree, and there's what your healthy redbud leaves should look like. So you get a lot of damage to foliage with a lot of these herbicides. Here's an example of an ash tree with stunted ash shoots there. There's your healthy ash leaves. Sometimes herbicides basically burn the tissue. So here's an example of a bur oak that's been affected by herbicides. So I'm just gonna the main thing, there's a lot of things we could talk about with herbicides. I just want to familiarize everyone with some of the common routes of herbicide exposure to our trees. We usually think of when trees are damaged by herbicide, we think, oh, it was spray drift. The damage occurred because the winds blew the spray droplets onto the tree. And yes, that occurs. But I think more often what we're seeing in our landscapes is vapor drift. Many of our herbicides used in our lawns are volatile. That means they basically go from a liquid state to a gas state. They evaporate into the air, and it's that vapor that's moving off-site and hitting the trees. And I like to tell people, think about when you're pumping gas for your car. You see those.
Something was today.
Sorry?
Walked out to get the.
Oh, sorry. I think someone wasn't muted. Yeah, so I like to mention gas vapors coming up when you're pumping gas at your car. Well, a lot of herbicides are just like that. They are volatile. They will produce vapors. In particular, dicamba and 2,4-D, those are two common lawn herbicides. They are very volatile. And volatility of these herbicides increases on hot days. So the recommendation is not to spray herbicides on hotter days. 85 degrees is kind of that point where you want to stop spraying some of these volatile herbicides to prevent that vapor drift from occurring. So, and then finally, root uptake is another common route of herbicide exposure. So the herbicide moves into the soil, and basically the tree roots will pick up that chemical and carry it up into the tree. And root uptake, yes, can occur with some of the 2,4-D, dicamba, other lawn herbicides. You can get a little bit of root uptake that way from those herbicides. But I think the more damaging root uptake occurs with ground sterilants. These are herbicides that might be, advertised as giving year-long weed control or total vegetation control. These are herbicides used in, to control weeds around fence lines or around utility boxes or utility poles or in your driveway, your sidewalk cracks, gravel lots, where you're trying to get some long-term control of weeds. But unfortunately, they're moving into the soil, and root systems of trees can often extend into some of these areas and pick up that herbicide. And this is some of the more damaging type of root uptake herbicides. So I'm going to stop there with my portion of the talk. And let me see if I can stop sharing here. See if I can figure this out. Okay. Well, Graham, are you able to stop sharing me? Let's see.
No, there should just be a red button for you to stop your share.
Yeah, and I'm having trouble finding it. Let's see. Oh, there it is. Okay, got it. Okay, now do we want to do questions now, or do we want to get through everybody's talk? Maybe let's move through everybody's talk real quickly and take questions at the end.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
that
see
might
any
be
questions
smart.
in the chat.
Okay. Lauren, do you want to talk about insect pests?
Yes. Let me get my presentation pulled up. Okay. And can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sweet.
Yes.
I am going to turn off my video. Oh dear. Zoom's acting funny.
Looks like we lost Lauren.
Yeah.
Her Zoom just crashed.
Yeah. Jennifer, do you
man.
want to go ahead and get going?
Sorry.
Oh, no. Okay, yeah, Jennifer can go next, maybe. Hopefully.
They're gonna have Jennifer go.
Yeah. Now, Jennifer, are you here?
I am here.
All right.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sharing the screen. How's
Woohoo.
that?
I can see it.
All right. Okay. So following along after Lori, she was mentioning that drought and other stressors can cause canker diseases. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that today because I see more and more canker diseases in the last decade or so. So I wanted to cover what cankers were and some of the cankers that I've been seeing. What exactly is a canker? Well, it's a pathogen that's usually bacterial or fungal, and it infects the bark and vascular tissue. Typically, we see this after hail damage, squirrel damage, anytime there's a physical injury in correlation with a tree stressor, like an environmental factor of drought, let's say. We pick on drought a lot around here. Cankers themselves can affect the structural integrity of the tree and may cause decline and death depending on what fungal or bacterial pathogen you have. Okay. So cankers can be split into 3 categories. You have annual cankers, perennial cankers, and diffuse cankers. Those are in levels of severity. So annual cankers typically doesn't kill the tree if the tree is healthy enough to fight it off. It's not severe most of the time, and the tree can wall off the infection before it starts. Perennial cankers, sometimes we call them target cankers, is an annual infection, but they cause the death of the walled off tissue. Oh, I heard somebody. Oh. They actually attack the walled off tissue that was created from the tree in the year previous, if that makes sense. So the pathogen comes in, the tree tries to wall it off, and then the pathogen attacks that wall. So you get tissue upon tissue upon tissue, and that's where you get that bullseye and that target appearance, as you can see in that middle picture there on that oak. Okay. Typically doesn't kill the tree unless you've got a bunch of those target cankers on a single stem, can kill the branch or on the actual trunk. Okay. Now, diffuse cankers are the most infectious and they're most damaging to trees because it happens so quickly, this infection, that the tree can't callus it off or try to fight it off, and then it eventually dies from this infection. Okay. So those are the 3 main types. Now, as canker susceptibility increases, severity of canker increases. It's a direct correlation there. So all you have to remember is that vascular tissue is compromised and there's no water movement coming up and there's no nutrient movement coming down at the side of that canker, and the tree is girdled there. Okay. There's just some symptoms and some signs of canker here. So that would be on my left, maybe your left. That's called black rock canker on an apple tree. And you can see that there was some wounding there in the middle of that, where the branches meet the trunk, and that canker has taken over the entire trunk. And on that bottom picture on the left, that's also black rock canker on a bad pruning stub there on an apple tree. Black rock canker you usually see in tandem with fire blight, which if I have time to talk about, I'll cover that as well. But that causes bacterial cankers. The middle top picture and top right and bottom right are all cytospora canker, which I'll cover. And one that's not as damaging, and you only see typically after hail, is that middle bottom picture, and that's a black tip canker on an oak. I'm going to have to update that picture. It's a little dark, but just some examples there. So we pick on drought a lot, but it's not just drought. Like I was saying, it's typically physical injury and some kind of environmental stressor in combination. Squirrel damage, wind and hail damage. Cicadas can be quite damaging to branches that can cause some entry points for canker and so on. But if you look at the bottom there, I wanted to stress that nearly all trees are susceptible to some type of canker. within their lifetime potentially. Here's the big question I get a lot is, are there treatments for canker? Unfortunately, there is no chemical out there that's going to treat canker and help it along. So I just say try to keep the tree as healthy as possible. Mulch if you haven't. Make sure you're watering properly if it's possible. Only fertilize when necessary. Make good pruning cuts, and then depending on the canker, you can prune infected branches out in a certain way, and bury, try to get that canker tissue off of the property if it's present, if you can. So hypoxylin canker, it's called Biscogwanaxia canker, if I'm saying that correctly. But I just call it hypoxylin canker because it's easier. It's a fungal disease that affects a lot of different hardwoods. There's many different hosts. And what I've been seeing as far as hypoxylin canker is there are a lot of bur oak stands on the Missouri River corridor, especially in the Luss Hills, northeast Nebraska, that have had a lot of hypoxylin canker in bur oak stands. And we attribute that to the drought in the last decade or so. And the reason I mentioned bur oak is because bur oak is really not that susceptible to hypoxylon, but there's that disease triangle, and it had the perfect conditions to monopolize these oak stands. One thing about hypoxylon is it can live on dead tissue for a long period of time, and it just sits and waits. And once those conditions are met, it quickly colonizes those stress trees, and the tree can die within 1 to 2 years. So on this picture, you can see these gray masses on the tree that eventually turn black, kind of like tar. You'll also see yellowing and wilting of leaf tissue. There's the two pictures side by side where you get the tar-like black appearance after the gray. As I said, you would cut down and burn because this can sit and wait in dead trees and dead logs for a long time. But you can try to prune out the infection if, this arbitrary number of 15%, you see that your infection rate is less than 15% in your canopy. I also had an issue in, I believe it was York. There was a gentleman that had hypoxylon on red oaks, and he didn't quite know what it was at first and cut down his trees, left those trees standing, and then the rest of his red oaks fell to hypoxylon as well. So Cytospora canker is another one that I see a lot, especially in blue spruce, because Colorado blue spruce is highly susceptible. This is another fungal disease. I also see it in Doug fir, and other pine trees. It's also not aggressive enough for healthy trees, just like hypoxylon, but I am seeing it more and more, especially in windbreaks and in urban areas where there is a lot of excess watering and that kind of thing. So Cytospora canker, instead of hypoxylon monopolizing quite quickly, Cytospora canker is a little bit more slow, even though it sticks around a little bit longer. The trees survive a lot longer with Cytospora than hypoxylon. You do get some yellowing and browning with needles and some branch dieback. Once it gets into the main trunk, that's when you see a lot more decline and actual faster death. Okay. And here's a tree. All these pictures are from the same tree, which is in the middle. Sometimes Cytospora can be very subtle unless you look a lot closer. And you can see in the tree, as you're looking at the tree, that there is just a slight difference in coloration in the needles from about the middle of the tree. And once you look closer, the branches have these pitch seeping coming out on the trunks and the branches. Sometimes very distinct. but you have to look closer to find it. Just some more pictures here, different types of examples of what you'd be looking for with Cytospora. Am I doing okay on time? Are we okay?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So while hypoxylin canker and Cytospora canker, fungal cankers, I also wanted to show you a little bit different bacterial disease that causes cankers as well, and that's fire blight. A lot of you might have heard of fire blight, but you see it in orchards, and you also see it on edibles, in the landscape, plus crabapple, hawthorn, and even plants like raspberries, blackberries. So this bacterial disease can be very devastating. It has a very high infection rate, and you can get millions of bacteria from just one canker. It's very common, and you need spring temperatures that are quite high and a lot of high humidity at the same time. This disease is very common, like I mentioned, and it's in low levels in our environment. So it's not something that you can necessarily prepare for. Okay. I don't want you to get too much into the weeds with this, but I wanted to show you how somewhat complex this disease cycle is. It overwinters as a canker on your stem, shoots, and trunks. You have to have the right temperature and the right amount of humidity for the bacteria to activate, and and then they start oozing, is what it's called. So these droplets are transmitted by insects, pruning, rain droplets, bees, and that infects the shoots and the blossoms as well. So bees specifically get picked on a lot because they can move fire blight ooze from flower to flower and plant to plant. But you can get a lot of other things that transmit this disease as well. So your fruit and spurs become infected, and your bacteria moves systematically within your stems, even into the trunk potentially. So new cankers are created, and that's where you get your typical shepherd's croaking, which I'll show you here in a minute, and then discolored sunken areas in the bark. So just some pictures to show you. You can get that bacterial oozing from the cankers in the trunk and the branches. And then you get discoloration. You can even see the oozing droplets on those flower stems that are eventually going to become fruit on the right-hand side there, those little droplets. There's your typical shepherd's crooking that you see with fire blight, and even some oozing on the right there with your flowering spurs that have actually killed those young shoots that would have been eventually fruits. So then it starts again. Your new cankers form, and your infected wood is a site for the inoculant for the next year. As far as control and monitoring of fire blight, if you see the infection and can cut back to live tissue at the right spot, you want to do so. And I usually say 4 to 6 inches past that infection, but you want to sanitize your tools after every cut. Typically, a bleach solution, 1 part bleach, 9 parts water. Some people use a little bit of liquid dish soap in there to make it stick a little bit better. You also do not, as with other cankers, leave the dead tissue on the property. You want to burn, bury it, try to get it away from other trees that might be susceptible. In this case, there are chemical controls on the market, bactericides that can help with fire blight. Sometimes you spray them at flowering, and that helps a lot. That's the only thing that I would spray during flowering, by the way. But then you also want to limit access to nitrogen to help manage plant vigor. And just do your due diligence and watch out for those signs that you may have fire blight. And that's all I had. So we'll move it on to Lauren. I can stop sharing. my
That
screen.
was awesome, Jennifer. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I know it was pretty quick, but oh,
This is-
what did I just do? Nope. Okay.
That's a happy tree there.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, how do I stop sharing? Oh, there we go. Stop share. Got it.
All right, Lauren's back.
I am, and hopefully Zoom wants to be my friend today.
Right. Cross our fingers. Go.
Cross our fingers. So hi. Is everyone seeing my presentation
Yes.
slide?
Great.
All right, awesome. So hi, my name is Lauren Keith, and I am a forest health specialist based out of Scottsbluff. So I cover a lot of the more western part of the state. And I'm going to be talking a bit about some insect and mite pests. But before I really get into it, I do want to make a brief note that I get really excited about talking about this sort of stuff, which can trigger my stutter. So it may seem like we're having audio issues at some points, but but granted that Zoom remains my friend, it is just the sound of my voice, and I appreciate everyone's patience with it. I'm going to turn off my video, but let's get into it. So when we're talking about our insect and mite pests, we're going to be hearing a couple of different terms, including our generalists and our specialists. Our generalists will typically feed on a wide variety of plants. And some examples of these can include some of our aphids and other defoliators, as well as some of our borers. While our specialists will generally feed on only a select handful of species or on a singular genera. And a good example of this can be our emerald ash borers and our Zimmerman pine moths. And I'm going to be covering a lot of these in the next few minutes. Starting with our emerald ash borer. Our emerald ash borer is an ash specialist, like it sounds, and it is a highly invasive boring insect. It's a type of euprestid or jewel beetle, which are known for their shiny metallic colorations and their bullet or torpedo-shaped bodies. The emerald ash borer specifically is about 1/3 of an inch long and this shiny emerald green in color. And they can create 1/8 of an inch D-shaped exit holes that we can often find higher up in the canopies and trunks of trees, although they can be found lower on the tree in later stages of infestation. The major damage by these guys is their S-shaped galleries that they make when they are larvae. And in higher concentrations, these galleries can essentially girdle the trees, like how Lori was talking about earlier. It can be a little bit hard to tell if your tree does have borers, though, because you obviously can't see these galleries from the outside. But you can often see generalized signs of stress on trees, like canopy dieback and epicormic sprouts that may warrant further investigation into if you're having a problem with borers. Currently, it is found in 15 Nebraska counties, as well as over state lines in the Denver and Fort Collins metropolitan areas of Colorado, as well as the eastern portions of South Dakota and Kansas, as well as in Iowa and Missouri. If you do think that you might have, if you do think that you might have some issues regarding this pest outside of these listed counties, please let us know. There is funding available for communities is for the management of this, but it is only available in counties that it has been confirmed. Another specialist species we have is the Zimmerman pine moth, which largely attacks our Austrians, ponderosa, and Scotch pines, as well as occasionally large mugo pines. The larvae of these guys like to feed on the nutrient-rich branch collars and terminal shoots of these trees, and this can either kill branches, or at the very least is increase the risk of breakage by wind and snow. When they do feed on the terminal shoots of trees, dead tops can sometimes look wilted or like a shepherd's hook. And while you very often won't see the physical insect, you can often see this soft pinkish pitch masses on trunks and around branches that are affected by it, and a very characteristic and these pitch masses can often look almost like pop. Next, I'm going to go over a couple of our more general species, including aphids. Aphids are tiny, soft-bodied, pear-shaped insects, and they do feed on a wide variety of plants. Unlike a lot of our insects, aphids are considered parthenogenic, which means that they can produce without mating. And so one can become a lot very quickly. Typically, the damage by these guys isn't super severe, and it's usually more of a stippling along the leaves. Although they can, their feeding can cause galls to form, which are typically more of a cosmetic damage than really a issue directly regarding the tree's health. But as they are feeding, they produce honeydew, which is a clear sticky substance that can cover or the entirety of leaf surfaces, as well as cars and posts, which can act as a substrate for the production of sooty mold fungi. If we look at the lower right photo, this fungi can create a thick mat on the leaves of trees and other plants. And while it's not a pathogen itself to the plants, it's not feeding directly from the plant, it can completely block the leaves from sunlight and inhibit the processes of photosynthesis. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about our spruce spider mites. Even though they are called spruce spider mites, they can affect a lot of our conifers. They are a cool season pest, meaning they are largely active in the spring and fall, but the damage is a lot more noticeable in summer as the affected needles dry out and die. You may be inclined to treat right then and there, but in reality, very few mites would actually be present at that time. And so a good way to test to see if you have spider mites is if you take a piece of paper and either a white piece of paper, or I know some people like to use a black clipboard, and place it underneath a potentially infected branch and shake the branch over that piece of paper, you should be able to see very fine, tiny dots fall onto that paper, and those are the physical spider mites. And so that's a really good way to tell if you do have spider mites. When it comes to mites in general, you do need to make sure that you are treating appropriately, as mites aren't actually insects, they're actually arachnids and are more closely related to our spiders and ticks. And so if you are trying to treat for these, making sure that you are using a miticide or a caricide, it as using insecticides could it actually be making your problem 10 times worse by only killing the natural predators like ladybugs. How am I doing on time?
You're doing good. Yep, you're doing good.
Awesome. So when it comes to defoliators and things that are affecting our leaves and needles of our trees, it is important to kind of acknowledge the difference between their effect on broadleaves or deciduous trees versus our conifers or evergreens. If you think about it, the broadleaves will create new leaves every year, and then drop all those years at the end of the season. And meanwhile, our conifers or our evergreens usually have 2 to 3 years worth of growth on their limbs at once. And so if a defoliator were to come in and completely decimate all of the needles on a conifer, it would take a lot longer for that tree to bounce back than if it were a broadleaf or deciduous tree. Before I wrap up, I do want to briefly note on IPM, or Integrated Pest Management. IPM is a pest management strategy that's focused on the long-term management of pests while minimizing risk to human and environmental health and maximizing cost effectiveness. A lot of the times when we see a pest or some sort of problem going on, we inherently immediately jump to, okay, what can we spray? What kind of chemicals are going to help to manage this problem? But if we are trying to manage using this sort of strategy, that's going to be our last option. Where if we can prevent a problem through education or plant species that have a lot less issues, then it may end up costing less in the long run, and versus immediately jumping to chemicals. I know one of the first things I learned regarding pest management was when I was a kid, and my mom taught me what a Japanese beetle was, and had taught me a physical or mechanical measure to manage those, of going and picking them off of her rose bush, because we personally just didn't want to use chemicals because we were in a more riparian area. And that's all I have. I think we have enough time for any questions.
Yeah, good job, Lauren and everybody. That was good. Uh, that's an amazing amount of knowledge here, pushed out in about 45 minutes. So I'd say $10,000 worth of knowledge for free. What a great resource, right? So I do see some questions coming on here. How often in years do ponderosa pines drop their needles approximately?
I believe ponderosa pine will drop their needles every 3 years.
That's what I'm remembering too. Yep.
Yeah.
But they're dropping some needles every year. They're third year
Yes,
needles, right?
exactly. It's going to be the oldest year's needles.
And it seems to me like needle drop is most pronounced on the white pines, and it's not as problematic looking on ponderosa pines.
Yeah,
There's
we have a
another
question.
question. Yeah,
go ahead,
go ahead,
Justin.
Graham.
There was a question about preventative measures for Zimmerman or pine tip moths other than insecticides.
So Zimmermans are one of our boring species, and so just general practice. A lot of our boring species are attracted to very stressed out trees, and so trying to make sure that your trees are healthy and getting enough water, and just trying to minimize that stress can help to just prevent that.
Yeah, I will add a little more on the Zimmerman too. So you can sometimes, if you just have, a couple of trees, smaller trees, you can sometimes just scrape away that pitch and kind of dig around in there and locate those larvae. There's going to be just one borer per pitch mass, and give it a little stab, and you've controlled it. And sometimes you can do
Oh.
that and be
Oh, I
pretty
didn't know
effective.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if you've got smaller trees. We sometimes see
Okay.
Christmas tree growers do that. If they have a smaller plantation and not a big infestation. And I would also say if you've got a lot of trees and some are heavily infested, I would selectively remove and destroy the trees that are most heavily infested so that you can kind of manage your, your supply, if you will, of Zimmerman pine moth in the area. So you'd want to do some chipping of the trees to get rid of the borers in those trees if you take them down. Pine tip moth, I'm not sure you can do a whole lot other than some spray on that.
There's a quick follow-up there still on Zimmerman. I think Bruce Hoffman is asking, please explain the life cycle and why that impacts target dates.
Okay. You want to talk about that, Lauren, or do you want me to talk about that?
I know the general life cycle off the top of my head, but you may be able to give some more information on that than me.
Okay. Yeah, there's actually a few different species of Zimmerman pine moth and related species. Most of the species that we are dealing with have one particular life cycle in which the eggs are laid in August, September timeframe. And so when they hatch, that's a time where you would want to have that chemical on the trunk bark and branch bark so that it controls those hatching larvae in the fall. So that's usually we kind of suggest about a second week of August timing for spray. And then again, the larvae overwinter in tiny little cocoon-like structures called hibernaculum underneath the bark scales. And then in the spring, those little tiny larvae will come out again and kind of wander around on the bark looking for a place to tunnel in. And so that's another opportunity to control the larvae. So we recommend another bark spray second week of April, roughly, to catch that second time that they're out and exposed. So that's kind of the explanation there of the Zimmerman pine moth life cycle. So then they tunnel in, feed during the late spring, summer, and then the moths will emerge around late July, August
And
timeframe.
do I remember Zimmerman's worse on young and medium-sized trees? And your tree, just because you have one or two doesn't mean you've lost your tree, right? It may grow past it and.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's good to watch for it in those young trees because that they can quickly affect the structural, integrity of the branching system, and so if you can watch for it and do some control measures, especially when the trees are very young, up to about 15, 20 years ago. Once they get a little older, the trees seem to be a little better at handling
Yeah,
the infestation, but then again, you've got your drought, you've got your other,
factors.
factors that are making them
Yeah.
more susceptible too.
Yeah, as Lori said, when I was doing plant healthcare, I always remembered those months starting in A. That's when you're looking to treat for pine moth, and that was an easy way to help me kind of remember the timing roughly on all that. Before we get to Kirill and Dean's question, I did put a link in the chat to that CEU and feedback form. I'll do that a second time so you guys can get to that easy. So whenever you are ready, go ahead and get in there and start filling that out as we get through these last couple questions.
And is that, Graham, just for ISA or is that both ISA and NAA certification?
Yeah, there's even a way to enter your information for Society of American Foresters as well. So
All right.
either of those three organizations you can enter your information for, and we will submit that info to those groups on your behalf once we have that collected from everybody. So, and
Awesome.
again, that's just for feedback as well. So tell us, Justin talks too much, or
Yeah,
whatever you want to tell us about
Yeah.
how the webinars are going.
right.
Kirill had a question about feeding birds. In Sweden, every house has at least one bird feeder. Do you think that can be a reason for less insect damage on trees in urban environments?
Lauren.
How are bird populations affecting some of these tree pests?
I like that question.
Me too.
Me
Make
too.
us feel good, Lauren.
Goodness. I mean, like reasonably, I would say that like more birds in the area can definitely affect the amount of insects that can damage. I think I actually was reading a paper not too long ago that the best biocontrol for emerald ash borer was woodpecker feeding.
Oh, wow.
So it would make sense
Yeah.
is that if there's more birds in an area, that there would be less insects that could be damaging to the trees.
All right. Go woodpeckers. And then Dean had
Well,
a
and
question.
I'd like to
Go ahead,
just
Lori.
quickly add that a lot of our songbirds, that's what they feed their young, are the caterpillars and other insect, they have an insect diet to feed their
Right.
young. And so, if you're attracting birds to your area with the feeders, they may hang around and continue to build their nests and feed their young and help control some of the insect pests on the trees. Now, of course, a lot of these insect pests are not a big deal on trees. A little bit of defoliation by some caterpillars isn't going to generally harm trees that much, and yet you're attracting a lot of wonderful wildlife to your yard when you have these trees and these caterpillars in them. So.
Yeah, great points, Lori. I would just add that I think that bird predation on tree pests can probably bring a large population down to a small population, but it's probably not going to be the reason that you have none of a particular pest at all.
Right.
You need the buffet to build up a little bit before birds are going to key into that typically. I'm not a bird expert, but that's just kind of a general understanding about that. Of course, nature always has exceptions to those rules that someone more knowledgeable could probably point out.
Well, sure is a great question. I think if we're doing our landscapes right, we're making good bird habitat. So, and what's that? Food, shelter, and water. So,
Yeah. Dean was asking a little bit about a cleaning solution. I know at least Jennifer had mentioned sterilizing tools, and she
Yeah.
and I both chimed in on the chat on that. But I think, 5-10% of, a bleach or peroxide solution is effective as far as I understand. Do any of you three have any more specifics there?
I thought I
No, that-
heard that, oh, sorry. I thought I heard that the Clorox can sometimes be a little corrosive,
yeah, it
the
can be.
equipment. and you
yeah,
might
that's
wanna
what I
go with
was,
the- Yeah, ethanol,
that's what I would,
alcohol might be better.
yeah, that's what I was gonna mention is, when I was working for tree care companies, I would mix my own solution and put it in a spray bottle that I could carry with me if I was pruning out diseased branches. But if you are using some kind of bleach, you have to be aware that you might rust out your tools. So plan accordingly to try and clean them off a little bit better when you get back from the field.
Yeah, Bruce mentions in the chat that Dr. Chalker Scott talks about this a bit, and so
Yeah.
her Garden Professor blog would be a great resource for some more specifics on those recommendations.
I got a question for all three of you quickly. We are past 1 o'clock, and this is America. Anybody that wants to leave sure can feel free to do that. But if we keep questions going, this is a good group of people to ask stuff to. What are you guys seeing coming out of winter? As I drive around Lincoln and eastern Nebraska, I'm seeing some trees that don't want to wake up. So it's probably a culmination of 3 or 4 years of stress, but especially like pin oaks and ash trees, of course, with EAB here in the Lincoln area. But what other things are you seeing out there? Is the bur oak issue still bad? Whatever you're thinking. How's that for a general question?
Well, Lori and I drove up to Ord yesterday to plant trees, and I did notice, I mean, even though we were heading a little northwest from the eastern part of the state, I did notice that a lot of the ash trees that in places where EAB hasn't been found, I was looking out for, leaf emergence, and it seemed to be a little bit slower than what I'm used to. Lori, did you notice that yesterday?
Uh-huh.
Well, I know one thing that have been noticing, of course, is not only with the emerald ash borer, but we've got the ash sawfly, which has now defoliated trees in the spring last at least 2 or 3 years here. And again, they are starting up again, feeding, and not again. It's a general defoliator, but it's kind of a nuisance thing because once they start getting a little bigger, they start to drop bigger and bigger fecal pellets.
Huh.
So you get this rain of fecal pellets under your tree, and it's just kind of a nuisance pest. So those are active. I've noticed right now they've hatched and are starting to feed on the ash trees. So that's just one comment I've
Very good.
noticed to make.
Well, it looks like we were able to get to all those questions without going too far over on time. Last call to get on that form for your CEU needs and/or giving us a little feedback on the webinars. Bring us home, Justin.
I don't have any big words of wisdom. I think I'm worried about for us here in across Nebraska, 3 or 4 years of pretty serious drought and what it's going to mean for. We might start to see some serious decline in park and community trees just because of that. I live in Waverly and we've had water restrictions for 3 years in a row now, so I'm nervous, but cross our fingers for some spring rain yet.
Yeah, well said.
On both sides of the state, there's been a lot of drought stress. Stout trees love crunchy pines, unfortunately, out here.
Yeah.
So
And I think we have to remember
hoping for
too
rain.
that drought, even if we get the good rains and we suddenly have a really good year, even a good few years, what the trees have already gone through is
Right.
going to be stick with them and keep them stress. They're going to be under stress and they're going to be struggling with things for a very long time. And we may see continued decline even
Right.
if conditions, return to a much better state. We may see these trees declining for many years into the future.
Yeah, Lori, I think we should bring you back to do your cavitation demonstration
Yeah,
on how
right.
that works.
Right.
It's really
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, stress in trees and problems is rarely a single issue. It's usually a couple factors all kind of converging to make things bad for the tree. So keep that in mind and keep your detective hat on and look at the context of your landscape, not just the tree itself, but what's going on around it as you evaluate what's going on, as Lauren mentioned about integrated pest management as well.
Yeah,
So,
that was spot
yeah.
on. Are you guys available for anybody attending here to send questions to directly? How do they reach out about tree problems?
Yeah, sure. We're happy to answer tree questions. Do we still have that trees link?
Yep.
Yeah.
We do.
What is
We do.
that called
I think it's
It
officially?
is trees@unl.edu. I'll put that in the chat.
Yeah.
That's kind of our general email that then gets routed to whichever